really a first-round draft choice.
He's an all-star.
I can't wait to get him confirmed, or
I agree.
hopefully the Senate will confirm him.
Thank you for all you're doing.
Sure.
Senator Harris.
Thank you. Secretary Kelly, as a follow-up to Senator Tester's questions, you mentioned that you have, in your career, had back-channel conversations with foreign governments. Is that correct?
Had people I could rely on to pass information to foreign leaders.
And was that in your current capacity as a member of the President's cabinet?
That was in my capacity when I was in uniform.
And did you ever initiate?
I wouldn't hesitate to do it now.
And did you initiate any of those conversations such that you initiated that they would take place inside the embassy of a foreign government?
I have gone to embassies, both in my current assignment as well as in past assignments, or met with members of the diplomatic corps from other countries.
Have you initiated back-channel conversations to occur
what I was saying?
Inside of those embassies as opposed to attending a cocktail party?
I've had conversations with members of foreign diplomats in various places and talked to them about my perception of what they could do better in response to things that the United States government would like to see them do.
Thank you. Secretary Kelly, included in the President's budget is a provision that says, quote, the Secretary of Homeland Security may condition a grant or cooperative agreement awarded by the Department of Homeland Security to a state or political subdivision of a state for a purpose related to immigration, national security, law enforcement, or preventing, preparing for, or protecting against or responding to acts of terrorism. Specifically, the budget authorizes the Secretary to condition grants on compliance with any lawful request by DHS to detain an alien for a period not to exceed 48 hours. Are you familiar with that?
I'm fairly familiar with it, yes.
I'm sorry?
Fairly familiar with it, yes.
Grants that are subject to new conditions would include the Urban Area Security Initiative, a DHS grant that provided California last year with $124 million to help urban areas prevent, mitigate, and respond to acts of terrorism. This grant supports more than 100 incorporated jurisdictions in 12 counties in the Bay Area of California alone. It supports them to buy equipment, enhance systems, and conduct trainings so that localities can prevent, mitigate, and respond to acts of terrorism. Are you aware of that?
That's a good thing.
Another DHS grant is the State Homeland Security Grant Program that provided California $60.2 million last year to support state, local, and tribal efforts to prevent terrorism and to prepare the nation for threats and hazards that pose the greatest risk to security in the United States. Is that correct?
I wish I had the same document I could read from as you do.
Are you familiar with this grant program in your department?
I'm familiar with the grant program.
And are you aware that there are a number of federal courts that have imposed civil liability on local governments for complying with ICE detainer orders that were not supported by probable cause? Can you answer the question?
Am I aware of that?
Yes.
I am.
And in order then to comply with a 48-hour ICE detainer made with no probable cause, wouldn't that force the jurisdiction to choose whether to comply with a federal court ruling or forfeit vital public safety funds that are administered by your department?
I'm not a lawyer, but I think that federal law is federal law, state law is state law, and if you know, we have a different view of the impact of some of the state rulings, but I'm not.
Well, imagine, sir, if you will, that you were a local law enforcement leader presented with a choice of either complying with federal law that means that you may expose your department and your jurisdiction to civil liability, or forfeiting DHS funds that are designed and intended to help you fight terrorism at a local level. Wouldn't you agree that puts those law enforcement leaders in it's almost a Hobbesian choice?
Well, Senator,
how are they supposed to choose?
Had you not cut me off, I would have said the same thing you just said. Probably not as eloquently, but I'd have said the same thing you said. I appreciate the fix they're in. I appreciate that they get their legal advice from the state and locals. And below the radar, we work with every police and sheriff department in this country to the degree that they can and are comfortable with.
Secretary Kelly, what do you mean below the radar? They have two choices, and they are accountable. Excuse me, sir. They are accountable
Yep.
to their jurisdiction, to the bodies that may have appointed or elected them.
Right.
And they have to make choices. What do you mean below the radar?
We talked to them on the telephone, and
And what are you instructing them to do when presented with those two
we
choices?
tell them to, whatever they can do within the law, the interpretation, we're willing to work with them.
So are you aware that there are local law
At least
enforcement?
finish once before you interrupt me?
Sir, with all due respect,
With all due respect, Senator.
are you instructing local law enforcement leaders that they can overlook a DHS or detainer request so they're not exposed to criminal liability?
We talk to them about whatever they're comfortable with, whatever they think they can do within the interpretation of their local attorneys general, as an example, or local lawyers.
So when they're
Let me
instructed,
finish once,
excuse
Senator,
me, I'm asking the questions.
but I'm trying to answer the question.
When they tell you, as I know local police chiefs are being told, that it would expose their municipality to civil liability if they comply with the detainer request, are you telling them that you will not withhold the DHS federal funding that they rely on?
Okay, before I start to answer, will you let me finish?
If it's responsive to the question, of course.
We talk to them on the phone and tell them whatever they're comfortable with, whatever they can do within the interpretation of their local lawyers or legal advisors, we'll work with them.
So are you willing to then not withhold federal funding when police chiefs tell you that they cannot comply with the detainer request because they've been told by their lawyer that they will expose their jurisdiction or their department to civil liability?
I'm willing to work with them in any way I can within the law, federal and local law, whatever they're comfortable with. I don't make threats to people, Senator.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Harris. By the way, there's actually a very simple fix for this predicament, and it's a huge predicament. Let's pass a law to give those local law enforcement officials liability protection against those civil suits. It was part of Pat Toomey's sanctuary city law that could clear up this whole difference. So there's actually a pretty simple fix here, which I would certainly support.
Well, and I would support any fix that would not withhold funding for local law enforcement to meet the demands that they face around combating terrorism in their local jurisdiction.
So this could be a bipartisan solution here. Let's provide that civil liability protection against those civil suits so local law enforcement aren't caught between a rock and a hard place in a very difficult situation. So let's work on that together. I'd appreciate that. I'm sure Secretary Kelly would enjoy working with us on that as well. Senator Carper.
Thanks, Mr. Secretary. Thank you for joining us today. It's good to see you. When I first heard the words St. Elizabeth's, I thought, why would we spend that much money on creating a campus, if you will, a home, a consolidated home for the Department of Homeland Security? And over time, I became convinced that one of the ways to actually enable the leadership of this department to manage their department and to improve their performance and, frankly, improve the morale of the employees is to actually pursue and implement the plan to create this campus. When Jay Johnson became the secretary, he had the same kind of misgivings that I originally had about the proposal. Would you just take a moment and tell us where you've had a chance to get a feel for this and how your department's just so far flung, right. And what do you think we ought to do, and how does the administration's budget actually take us in that direction, or not?
Well, Senator, Senator, we are in. I can't count the number of locations around the city, various parts. Every part of Homeland Security is just spread out over all of Hell's Half Acre here. To bring all or most of it or some of it together over at St. Louis makes a lot of sense just from the point of view of time management. I mean, first, in money. We spend a huge amount of money renting, choice downtown real estate here in the city. We could avoid much of that. I think we would realize if and when St. Elizabeth's open, billions of dollars in savings over 5 and 10 years. But the other issue is time management. I mean, it takes me a half an hour to get from where I sit most of the time to meet with CVP or Rice or whatever, and then obviously, half an hour to get back. Sometimes I do that 2-3 times a day. It kills either my time management or their time management. I do the best I can not to inconvenience the people that work for me. But it would be an advantage to be more or less in one place. St. Elizabeth seems to be the locale. But frankly, as I've gotten smart on that particular location, there are some worker issues that we need to sort out, and we can do that in terms of transportation, access to metro, that kind of thing. But overall, it would be a cost savings as well as a time savings if we were to consolidate much of the headquarters effort in one location, St. Elizabeth.
There are two pieces of the funding. One is for GSA, and the other is for the Department of Homeland Security. I think one is for infrastructure, and one is for, if you will, for fit out. And one of them is, I think the GSA piece is funded in the 18 budget. The DHS funding is not there. So we'd like to follow up with you on that, and certainly talk with our appropriators, some of whom are on this committee, I believe.
Sir.
I want to go back down to the southern border. We see some substantial increases in funding for CBP, for ICE, money for detention centers, money for a wall. There's also money for what I call force multipliers, and I'm a big believer in force multipliers. I'm not a big believer that we need a 2,000-mile wall. There's some places where a wall makes sense, but the idea of investing in these force multipliers that have been demonstrated to be effective is good. You and I have talked often about root causes, and the root causes of why the people continue to come from Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador has a lot to do with our insatiable demand for drugs. The drugs are trafficked through those countries. They come to us. We send them money and guns. And we set up something called the Alliance for Prosperity a couple of years ago. Actually, those three countries set it up, and we came in, and as you know well, you were there at the creation, to try to emulate what's been accomplished in Colombia. And do you have a sense for how things are going in those three countries with respect to the goals that they set themselves under the Alliance for Prosperity?
A great question, and really a great story. Not perfect, but a great story. Based on the confidence that the Congress and the previous administration put into the three northern tier countries in helping them out, recognizing that first and foremost they have a problem. Much of it is generated by our drug, insatiable appetite for drugs. That those countries are nearly failed states, much as Colombia was 20 years ago and isn't today. So the miracle can happen. I mean, Colombia did it. And frankly, at the time, Plan Colombia was put together by the United States Congress with a lot of resistance in other places. And as you know, I think, Senator, put some American money, I think 4 cents on the dollar, but ultimately it is a miracle that's happened in Colombia. So when people tell me it can't happen in Central America, I tell them to look at Colombia. So that said, the Alliance for Prosperity, the three countries putting their own money into it, and then through the Congress, the Obama administration, Vice President Biden was huge help in this, as you know. Get some additional U.S. funding put against it, controlled in the right way. So what's happened in Central America since we worked on Alliance for Prosperity? Violence is down. Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala used to be the three most dangerous countries on the planet, more dangerous, frankly, than Afghanistan and Iraq was at the time. They've cut their murder rates by either a third or more, still horrific, but cut it a third or more, all with human rights in mind, all with the rule of law in mind. They have a long way to go, but their economies are starting to grow. They've gotten their arms around the corruption. 4 or 5 years ago when I took Southcom, everything was going in the wrong direction on Colombia or in Central America. I just read a report this morning where they've either stabilized, not getting worse, or getting better. That's huge. I think in addition to my outreach, back-channel communications in some respects to the leadership down there through religious organizations and NGOs, so that I don't make it official, but they know where I am and where I'm going on these issues. We have also asked them to ask their citizens to not waste the money and head north, to not get on that terribly dangerous network that I've described before. Stay where they are, because if they come here, this is no longer an illegal, alien-friendly environment. It is a very legal alien, and as the Senator knows, 1.1 million people a year, but it is no longer a friendly environment for illegal aliens. Don't waste your money. Don't go on the dangerous network. What we're doing, we've put together, frankly, the DHS has been the energy behind it, or although it's not my job, and we've passed it off to the State Department. So next week in Miami, we're bringing together as co-sponsors of a conference on the northern tier countries, Mexico, great country, great partner, and the United States co-sponsoring. We've got observers coming in, Canada, I think Spain, certainly Costa Rica, Panama, Colombia, maybe Peru, for Due Day Conference. That conference will be led by the Vice President. I'll be there, Senator or Secretary Tillerson, as well as Commerce and Treasury will be there. The point is, the first day we'll bring together investors to do the best we can to stimulate what's going on in those three countries economically, and then the next day will be security issues, trying to get at the human trafficking and the drug trafficking. And just last week, I was down in Haiti meeting with the new leadership there on another issue, suggested that maybe the Haitian president come on board for one of those days, or at least do a cameo type appearance. So what we're trying to do is help them solve their problems at home economically. We've already helped them solve the security not solved, helped them go in the right direction on security. And with a little luck, with a little luck, we might actually be able to help them. But if we don't reduce the drug demand in the United States for heroin, cocaine, and methamphetamine, this is all a complete waste of time.
Yeah. I did say to my colleagues, the Secretary said I asked a great question. I thought he gave a great answer. And I think you've made the case for continued support for the Alliance for Prosperity. Just like in Colombia, the lion's share of the responsibility rests on these three countries. We didn't just say to Colombia, we're going to come in and solve your problems. We said, you solve them. You can do it, and we can help. And we said the same thing with these three countries, and you made the case very well. I'm delighted to hear about the summit. I don't believe our schedules allow us to go and participate, unfortunately, but my thoughts and prayers will be with you and on your efforts in this regard. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Senator Carper. Just a moment of clarification. You mentioned 2,000 miles. So there's no confusion. This budget is literally requesting 74 miles of fencing, 60 new miles of fencing, 14 replacement in the San Diego sector. I was just down there. It's amazing how many holes have been cut into that San Diego wall and been repaired. And the 60 new miles, 32 miles of that is in Rio Grande sector, new fence, new wall, and 28 is part of a levee system. So again, we're talking about 74 miles over 1,700 to 2,000 mile. I think that's a pretty reasonable request. Senator Heitkamp.